Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Because the box hedges have all been taken out from the dual garden and the cottage garden, we've got lots of bare soil to fill up. So I've been moving plants around the garden, and herbaceous plants can be moved now. This is an Echinopsis retro, which has got wonderful metallic-y balls of flower. It'll reach up to about 3 foot tall. And what I want it to do here is to work with the roses, because it will start to flower after the roses are finished. And although there's not much top growth to be seen, if I take that out, there we are, you see, a pretty good root system has already formed. And it does show you how herbaceous plants work, because these are plants that will have really strong roots, even though the top dies back every year. So I'll pop this in this hole. Echinops like good drainage, but I will water that in really well. And it's worth saying that if you are moving any herbaceous plants, give it a soak. There we are. Hopefully that will hardly notice that it's gone from pot into the ground and will grow away strongly. Now, coming up on today's programme, we meet a couple whose shared passion has created a garden that both looks and tastes very good indeed.
The garden means everything to me. When I'm out here, I'm in my happy place.
I think of my vegetables as my friends. If you're nice to Mother Nature, she will be nice to you.
Carol visits the glorious tulip displays at Dunsborough Park in Surrey.
Tulips make you happy. Look at each one individually and it's a masterpiece. But see them en masse and the impact is truly breathtaking.
And I shall be adding a range of umbellifers to my orchard beds. While I am recycling as many plants as possible, I've also bought a few for the spaces, and particularly to complement the roses here in the cottage garden. Planting alongside roses can be quite tricky. Obviously, you don't want anything to steal their thunder. Also, roses do need good ventilation and good light. So if you crowd them with vigorous herbaceous plants, that's not going to do them any good at all. However, if, like me, you grow shrub roses, they will be glorious for about 4 weeks, and then that's it. They've done their stuff. So you do need to add more colour to work both with them and subsequently when they have completely finished. So it's not always easy to get all those mixtures right, but I've got 3 plants here that do the job perfectly. The first is a Nepeta, catmint. Now there's a very well-known variety called Six Hills Giant, and if you've got sandy soil or chalk, it's perfect. Absolutely wonderful plant. However, if like me you've got clay, the problem with Six Hills Giant is it's too much of a giant and then it just flops. So I've got a variety called Walker's Low, and there is a clue in the name because it is much less vigorous, and although I've never grown it before, I am banking on it not to collapse in quite such a spectacular fashion. Nepeta, like roses, do best in full sun. And when Nepeta has finished flowering, you can cut it back hard and it will reflower. So that means that we will get a fairly long flowering season from it. Now, a good accompaniment is a salvia. Lots and lots of different salvias. This is Salvia caradonna that will cover the bare branches at the base of the rose and start flowering just about the time that the rose finishes. Like the Nepeta, it'll do well in full sun. And then in the front, I want something lower that will spread and will flower for a long time. And there's probably no better plant that will do that than the hardy geranium, and no better hardy geranium than this, which is Roseanne. And this will flower from summer right through till autumn. So we have the clear blue, the rather darker purple, and then the paler lavender colour behind it. But the roses are carrying the main attention, and then these will come up through after them. Now, that's fine when you're creating a border. You want harmony and you want balance, but sometimes plants can just stand alone. And a couple of weeks ago, we went down to Sussex to visit McBean's nursery, where they raise plants that are amongst the most glamorous of any on this planet.
When you see an orchid, you can see it's got a wow factor, yeah? It's just got a bit more pizzazz about it. I'm Jim Durrant. I've been growing and breeding orchids for 50 years. The nursery was founded in 1879. We imported plants from South America, from northern India, up in the Himalayas, and then we've been breeding those plants ever since. So we can trace all our plants back to the original plants that were collected in the 1870s. We grow mostly the Cymbidiums, that's this sort of thing here. These are Himalayan plants, they're fairly cool growing. Our climate absolutely suits the Cymbidium. They go in the garden through the summertime, you keep them frost-free in the wintertime. Simple as that. Some of the plants, obviously, I've known for my 50 years because each year they flower. I think, oh, I know what that is, and you've seen it before and before. But then, of course, you get added to that, you then get all the hybrids, the children bred from it as well. So I can go back 5 generations at this place to see plants that are bred from plants, bred from plants, bred from plants. So it's just like a family tree, really. I can trace them right back to their great-great-great-grandparents. This was the very first one I bred. This is Highland Canary. I bred this in 1975. It's a nice, small, but bright flowers, a really lovely little plant. The parents of this plant are these two here. So this is the Mavourneen Jester, and this is a lovely old plant that's bred in the late 60s, early 70s. And then this is the other parent, this is the Kariga Canary. And again, the whole reason for this breeding, I say, is to make them a sort of really small, compact, joyous, a fun plant, basically. When this first flowered, I mean, it takes us 6 years from making the seed to actually seeing them flower. We came in early one morning, and I was absolutely blown away. To see your very first cross flowering after waiting 6 years is quite an emotional thing, to be perfectly honest. It's still that buzz today. It's, you know, when you're waiting for new seedlings to flower, it's amazing. The most common question we get asked is, how often do you water your plant? Well, you've got to water it when it's dry. You can't just do it because it's Sunday morning, because it's convenient to you. You must let the plant dry out. In nature, a lot of these plants would go up a tree, so they'll be sitting way up in a tree, and obviously water would never sit around the roots there, it just dribbles through. Conversely, some of our plants grow in the ground, but even they're in very stony, open compost or mixes of soil or whatever, and so they, again, would never sit wet. More orchids are killed by overwatering than absolutely anything. So it's much better to keep your plant on the drier side. Along with the Cymbidiums, we've been growing these fellas, which are Oncidiums. These are Oncidium alexandra in this case. This is a species. So this plant is over 100 years old, and we've been using this for breeding lines ever since, basically. So our first generation, which is this one, so there's probably 20 years generation in that hop. You can see we're getting a bigger, bolder, rounder flower, as was the trend of the time. We then got another generation, which is this one here. Again, there's 20 years difference in these crosses to give us a slightly bigger, even more rounded flower. And then we've got another generation, which is another 20 years, to this fella, which we've ended up with a really sort of full flower, a bit blousy. But, like all fashions, everyone now wants the original type, dainty little flower. So the whole breeding program has gone full circle. We've actually gone back to the place we started with, certainly about 100 years ago. We pollinate these just as nature does. Just in this case, it would be a bee would naturally go in and pollinate the flower. This is why orchids look different shapes and sizes, because they're meant for different insects, different pollinators. So they've got this sort of slightly sprung-loaded lip here. I can see this goes up and down, and that's to push the bee to the top of the flower when he's in there, so he picks up the pollen. See, my finger's a bee. So our bee goes into the flower, he has a drink right down the base of the flower, and as he comes back up, he'll automatically fly off with the pollen on the top of his head there. So in this case, he's flying around the Himalayas with these little pollen stuck on the back, a bit like sort of dealy boppers. He'll go down and have another drink right down another flower. And as he comes back up there, the pollen is automatically captured by the female bit of the flower, which is hidden under this cap here. And that's done on viscosity. The glue holding it to the bee's head is only half as sticky as the glue on the female bit of the flower. So the pollen grains will grow down there, and that will become a seed pod. But it will take us a good year to get ripe seed, and then we've got another 5 years growth before we see that flower. From making that cross, we will see that in flower in 6 years, virtually to the day. Orchids are very popular. In fact, they're more popular than they've ever been, to be honest. People are growing them, but a bit worried about actually keeping them growing or reflowering them. They're much tougher than everyone thinks, to be honest. People are a bit frightened by the word orchid. I think that's the problem. But once you understand where they come from, you know, is it a warm-growing plant? Is it a cool-growing plant? That gives you an idea of how they would naturally grow. So that's how you've got to follow that sort of temperature regime. And generally, orchids want a very good clean water. So we use rainwater, and then we add an orchid feed to that. And it must be an orchid feed. A normal household feed is far too strong for them. And we grow in a very, very open mix, a very barren compost. And we always underpot. We like to keep them in really tight pots because they don't make a lot of root and they flower better when they're slightly restricted. Nothing has full summer light. We always give it good shade right through the summertime. And that really goes for all orchids. They will follow those sort of conditions. I've been growing orchids now for 50 years, and to be honest, they still fascinate me. I think they're an amazing group of plants. They're sort of just something different about them. You buy a bunch of flowers, they last you a couple of weeks, but an orchid will last you a lifetime.
I think, despite the glamour of orchids, which is undeniable, the thing that comes through most strongly is that these are really quite tough plants, and more orchids are killed by kindness than anything else. Now, I've got here a tray of dahlias. These are cactus-flowered mixed dahlias that I sowed 3 weeks ago, and I hope that lots of you sowed them along with me too. And you can see that mine germinated really well, very quickly, and they have developed into nice, strong, young seedlings. It's really important that at this stage you move them on, because they will start to compete for moisture and nutrients, and that will stunt their growth. So we need to prick them out to give each one a separate container. That could be in a plug or, like me, in a pot. Now, when you're dealing with any seedling, it's really important to hold them by the leaf and never by the stem, because if you damage the leaf, there are others and it can regrow more, whereas if you damage the stem, that can be curtains for the plant. So I'm using the plant label, but you could use a knife and just gently cut round where the root is, and holding the leaf, just lever it out with as much root and compost attached as possible, but don't worry if the soil falls off. What really matters is you don't damage the roots. There we are. That is a healthy seedling, good root system, good top growth. So drop it into the pot. Just gently sieve your compost around it. And what I do is just give it a shake, and that's enough. Don't push it down with your thumbs, because at this stage, there's a real risk of damaging those small roots. What you have to do now is water them and put them somewhere protected. I use a greenhouse for the next week or two, and then when they've got established and I can see new growth on them, and they're nice and upright, I put them into a cold frame. You can still sow some now. There's still time to catch up on this, sow them, and then in 3 weeks' time go through the same process. Now, one of the things that I look for in any garden is not just wonderful planting and design and structure, but its personality, individuality, and that doesn't need to cost money, as we see from this film that has been sent to us from one of our viewers in Wiltshire.
Hello everybody, my name is Farida. We live in Wiltshire. During this lockdown, and for the first time in 4 years really, we've tried to redesign the garden and reuse all the things that we've had just lying around, including our old front door, which was replaced a few years ago. So we've just attached it to the fence at the end of the garden to make it look like a secret entrance to somewhere else. We've used old tyres and pallets, cushion to create a secret seating area. So here's using another old kitchen utensil for growing purposes. So this is an old colander that somebody was throwing out, which I've got. It's got lots of holes in it, so I don't want all the water to drain out too quickly. So what I've done, just used an old plastic compost bag. So I fill that up. And I'm going to be planting some coriander seeds today. Coriander's really good because the more you cut, the more you'll get. And then I'm just going to water it. And here's one I made earlier, 2 weeks ago. So this is a chimney cover actually that fell off from our chimney last year. So I've just put some moss in it, and then this is 2 weeks worth growth of coriander there. I've also used an old steel toe cap booth, so I've used it to plant a spare petunia that I had. So just grouped together some unusual things that you can reuse and recycle to grow things.
There's no question that we tend to think of plants needing a proper pot. The truth is you can grow plants in absolutely anything. Well, in this bed, I am sowing members of the carrot family. So this ground has been dug over lightly, and I'm just raking a fine tilth, which means there are no clods or stones that are going to stop these very small seedlings growing. That can go there. And now I'm going to start by sowing some parsnips. This is a variety called Tender and True, and it's really reliable and delicious. Now, parsnips need warm soil to germinate, and if the soil is cold to touch, then it's not time to sow parsnips. So I make a drill just by running my fingers through the soil like that. Ideally, each parsnip is going to end up about 3 to 4 inches apart. So sprinkle the seed as thinly as you can. Parsnip seed, even when the soil is warm, is fairly slow to germinate. So in that period, you can grow a catch crop of radish in the same drill. And this is a variety called Ravenello. And literally sow them on top of the parsnips. And they will germinate very fast and be ready to harvest before they start to compete with the parsnip. Now, I'm going to flip the board over like that and like that, and I can get another couple of rows in. Right, Patty, you're going to have to move because we're going to sow some carrots now. Come on, off you get. And I'm going to sow a variety of carrot called Nant. And carrots are less fussy than parsnips. They will germinate in slightly cooler conditions. But there is one big issue with growing carrots that has to be dealt with, and that's carrot fly. And carrot fly can smell a carrot from about half a mile away. So try and sow them as thinly as possible, because when you thin them, you release the fragrance of the carrot into the air. If it is very dry, it's a good idea to water them now so that the seed is in contact with moist soil. There's no doubt about it that there is huge pleasure to be had from growing your own food, from the sowing of the seed to the eating of it, sometimes months later. And this was all too evident when we went to Chipping Norton to visit the garden of Gerald and Liz Stratford.
We both love this place.
This is our heaven, our absolute heaven. I'm Liz,
Gerald,
and this is our garden. We're out here every day, aren't we?
yes dear. Yeah,
Yeah.
we are, yeah.
Gerald does the vegetables, I do the flowers.
Everything you see is what we've achieved in just under 5 years.
4 years, dear.
Is it 4?
Yes, it's not 4 years till December.
Well, 4 years. Well, these are my beans. They're called Guinness World Record because it can be known to grow large. I think that could be a prize winner. I like to do things 100%. And Liz is magic, she supports it. Don't you, Liz?
Yes, for my sins I do.
I've caught an awful lot of fish. But when we come here, I decided I've had enough fishing. I've got a lovely garden. I'm going to challenge myself with the gardening. And I can't stop trying to do my best.
Or do even better.
I like to think I'm like a conductor. I don't talk to my plants, but they do understand me. These are all grown outside. I bring them in the greenhouse to ripen off, and they're very mild. There is a fallacy about big veg being tasteless. Load of nonsense. They do eat nice. I particularly like root vegetables because you never know what's below the ground until you lift. You're seeing all your work come into fruition. It's the end result. You've achieved something. That's one stump-rooted carrot, perfect in all ways. All my effort rewarded. Oh. And the smell was real carrot. I'm known locally as the Potato King, and I love eating potatoes. I could eat a plate of potatoes on their own. That's how much I like the potato. There are 3 main types of potato. First early, second early, and main crop. The first early, you plant early and crop early. The second early is a slightly later potato. These are the pink fir apple, main crop. Lovely, waxy salad potato. They grow in very hard shapes. You just scrub it all off and cook them in the skin. They are beautiful. The Potato King is showing his prowess now. You can store any potato, but just make sure they're dry. I buy proper storage potato sacks because you mustn't let light into the potato because the potato will go green. £9 4 ounces, that's very good. My magic ingredient is horse manure. Horse manure, composted turf, and the green compost which we make from all our vegetable matter. These are called red MLA, main crop. They're quite a unique potato that they are red right the way through the flesh, not just the skin. I'll just cut one and show you. It tastes very nice. These are main crop potatoes. The main crop will grow from planting in 110 days. Most main crop potatoes are harvested August, September. These are Sarpomira. Oh, beautiful. Some people say potatoes don't smell. I think they do. If it looks nice, it will eat nice. These are the seed potatoes I'm growing for Christmas. They are Charlotte, my favourite potato. I've chitted it by putting it in the dark, and 2 weeks ago I put it in a cold fridge for 2 days. When you take them out, it promotes growth. Starts the potato thinking it's spring. And then you just place the potato with the shoots up. Now fill it to within 1 inch of the top. Put these basically anywhere with light and a modicum of warmth. Just a drop of water, and that will be coming up like this one.
The garden means everything to me. When I'm out here, I'm in my happy place.
I think of my vegetables as my friends. I love them, I give them all my attention, and everything's got a soul. If you're nice to Mother Nature, she will be nice to you.
Well, you can't argue with that. And if you fight nature, you will always lose. So you might as well work with her. Now, one of the things about working with nature is knowing what a plant wants in the first place. And these are blueberries growing in pots because what they really want is an ericaceous, acidic soil. And here at Longmeadow, we have a fairly neutral soil. And that means that they survive when they're planted in the ground, but they don't thrive. So I created my own ericaceous mix, and I top dress them every year with some composted bracken. This is a commercial ericaceous compost made from bracken, and you can also get an ericaceous compost made from pine bark, and both work really well. This powder you can see on it is actually ash from the fire that I put on all the soft fruit because it's high in potash, and that helps them flower and fruit. So if I just spread a layer with some composted bracken, it both acts as a mulch and a feed. Now, it is worth saying that you can't change the nature of your soil. That is impossible. So if you have an alkaline soil, it doesn't matter how much top dressing of bracken or pine bark you put on it, it's not going to make it acidic. It'll just make it slightly less alkaline. But if you grow it in a container that is already acidic, you can sustain that with this kind of top dressing. Now, houseplants have become incredibly popular over the last few years, particularly amongst a younger generation. And we've been sent a film from a gardener who loves plants and has lots of them and lives in a flat.
Hi, my name is Emma and welcome to my indoor jungle. Living in a top floor London flat, I don't have any outdoor space. So, in order to keep nature in my life, I have houseplants. Over 100. I can't stop. This greenhouse cabinet is great because you can really control the climate within it. I have a humidifier set up inside. I like to keep it somewhere between 65 and 80% humidity because a lot of the plants in this cabinet are tropical plants. So I have kitted it out with grow lights. I've also installed 2 fans for air circulation in the cabinet. Let me show you a few things that I have inside. This is one of my most prized plants. This is a Monstera albo. When this was growing outside of the cabinet, the white variegation on its leaves started to turn brown and get crispy. And that's because the humidity and the light just wasn't right for it. In the cabinet, it's the perfect environment. These are string of hearts cuttings that are propagating in moss, and they absolutely love the higher humidity of the cabinet. The last plant I want to show you is my Cissus discolor. I got it as a 1-leaf cutting 2 months ago, and it's got 8 leaves already, and I love it. Houseplants have really been my saving grace over this past year. With lockdown and everything, I haven't been able to go outside as much as I want to, so kind of bringing nature inside has really helped. Also, taking care of them is such a meditation for me. I can kind of not worry about the outside world and just really focus on taking care of my plants.
Well, I think we can all share that sentiment, whether we've been gardening indoors or out. Looking after plants has been the saving grace for so many of us over the last year. Now, here in the cricket pitch, the daffodils are now going over, and as they do so, they form seed heads. And you can see that the seed forms behind the flower. And if you're growing these in a pot or in a border, it's a really good idea to snap them off. Just with finger and thumb, remove it. That will mean that the foliage and the green part of the stem will photosynthesize and take all the goodness from the sun and feed next year's bulb. However, if you're growing them in long grass, as I am these, you want to leave the seed heads because you want the seed to ripen and spread and form new plants. And it's really a trade-off. If you want lots of smaller flowers, you leave the seed heads on. If you want fewer but bigger flowers, you just pinch them off. Still to come on today's programme, we return to Brighton to visit the garden of Kate Bradbury as she puts the finishing touches to her urban wildlife retreat.
So in my pollinator border, I grow things like crocus in spring, winter aconite. In summer, I go lavender and catmint to take that season right up to the end of the year.
Now this spring, I've planted for the first time some tulips here in the cricket pitch. And this is Tulipa praestans Shogun, and it flowered really early. It started to flower at the end of March, and the idea of tulips in amongst long grass is something that I'm only just beginning to work with, but I do absolutely love them. So it seems a really good moment to rejoin Carol when she made a visit to Dunsborough Park in Surrey to relish their fantastic collection of tulips.
Tulips make you happy. They're one of our most popular bulbs and surely the most charismatic by far. They're so diverse and the colour range is unbelievable. Look at each one individually and it's a masterpiece, but see them en masse and the impact is truly breathtaking. The tulip is a member of the lily family, and there are around 75 species with many more hybrids. They come in a myriad of forms and are divided into 15 different groups with names like Double Early, Darwin and Triumph, which reflect differences in their flower size, structure, form and habit. Now these are highly cultivated tulips, but their wild ancestors live up in the mountains, all along the Tian Shan range, which stretches from China right through to Turkey. And winters there are freezing cold, whereas summers are hugely hot. And that's exactly what tulip bulbs need. They've evolved to live under those conditions. The more we can replicate those conditions, the happier our tulips are going to be. Tulips are such magical bulbs to incorporate into your garden and so brilliant to mix with other plants. How about that for a vivacious combination? It's full of the joys of spring. This gorgeous creamy white tulip is Purissima, otherwise known as White Emperor. And here it's accompanied by a classic daffodil. This is Thalia, one of the Triandrus stuffs, and it's just so gorgeous. And then if you look underneath, this is a really exciting part. You can see the things that are going to take over from the tulips. When they're finished, there's big clumps of geraniums here, and the whole thing is overlooked by these gorgeous wisteria. It's just delightful. It makes you wish you'd done it yourself. This is a really exciting planting. The whole idea is that the colour is graded from palest yellow through brilliant yellows to oranges and ending up with almost fiery reds. It's a lovely idea. These are all Darwin tulips, most of them forms of Apeldoorn. If you see any tulip with Apeldoorn in its title, you can bet it's going to be a really grand tulip. I love the way they've used it so simply with this blue muscari. You don't even need a garden really, just in a container. You're planting up your muscari and your tulips at the same time and then waiting for the next spring to let them rip. This is the tulip meadow. It's glorious. Here, tulips are planted randomly in the grass under these huge oak trees. The whole idea is that when you're growing tulips normally, you'll grow them for the first year and they're absolutely magnificent. But in their second year, very often people will just discard them. The flowers aren't quite as good, the tulips aren't quite so spectacular. But here, instead of doing that, they bring them all over to the meadow and they plant them. They all blend together brilliantly, creating this sort of impressionistic effect. One other thing that I love about it is because some of these tulips are early, some of them are later, so this display will continue for weeks and weeks. And doesn't it just make you joyous looking at it? Everybody can grow tulips successfully. Just follow a few simple guidelines. First of all, choose really good bulbs. When you've got your bulbs, choose the sunniest spot you can and dig your holes nice and deep. 8 inches isn't too deep. And if your soil is on the heavy side, then line the holes with grit and incorporate some to the planting mixture as well. They need good drainage. Plant them late. Here they plant them in December, and that guarantees that you're going to get flowers of really good quality because they'll be subject to that period of cold. When they've finished flowering, don't let them go to seed. Take off the flowering stem, but let the foliage die back down into the bulbs because that will swell them and give you better flowers the next year. And if you've no garden, no worry. They love growing in pots. I love tulips. I love their colour, their diversity, the difference in their forms. They are beautiful, and at this time of year, nothing can hold a candle to them.
I do think that putting last year's tulips from containers into a meadow is brilliant, and I thought that looked so beautiful. Now, I'm often asked the best time to prune hydrangeas. Well, there are different types of hydrangeas and there are various different pruning regimes, but the vast majority, which includes all lace caps and mop heads, should be pruned now. The flower heads act as a kind of protection over winter. Hydrangeas are susceptible to frost because instead of being woody, they're rather corky stems, and the buds can get frost damaged if you expose them. So the first thing to do is to cut off the flower heads and then reduce them down by about 1/4 or 1/5, cutting back to just above a shoot. And while you're doing it, you can cut harder on any weak or spindly growth. Hydrangeas like light shade, they're sort of woodland edge plants, but they don't like drying out. And if your hydrangea is doing badly, the chances are it's too dry. Now, if you've got an established plant, it's a good idea every year to remove some of the older growth right back down to the ground. And that means that new growth will replace it, and that way the plant is constantly being renewed. The vast majority of hydrangeas produce their flowers on growth that was made the previous year. There are, however, a few hydrangeas, such as Hydrangea paniculata, that does the opposite. Its flowers are produced on new growth. And if you're confused by that, or you're just not sure which type your hydrangea is, then don't prune it. Watch it, see whether the new shoots made this summer carry flowers or just foliage. Then, having sorted that out, you'll know next spring whether to prune or not. Now, I think it's wonderful that more and more people are becoming aware of what an important habitat gardens are for wildlife. But I know that if you live in the country or the suburbs, that can feel a lot easier to achieve than if you live in the middle of a busy city. However, this film that we've been sent from a viewer in London shows that that need not be the case.
Hi, I'm Morgan, and this is my garden in sunny South London. I am an ecologist, and I specialise in urban biodiversity. And what I'm most proud of is my shed wildflower meadow. Firstly, I made my own substrate. This is a mix of peat-free compost, light expanded clay aggregate balls, and grit and gravel. So what this effectively does is create a low nutrient but high water retaining substrate for all of these wildflowers to grow in. The low nutrient element prevents grasses from taking hold. I've created this frame that was just a salvaged old shipping pallet and bordered it with these Caledonian cobbles. And then I also threw in some old woolly jumpers to provide some water retention. Mostly this is a recreation of the kind of brownfield sites that you find out towards East London. And it's more or less as simple as that. That was my wildflower roof. I'd encourage everyone to do the same, particularly if you're running out of space like me in a small garden. Thanks for watching my video.
I love that tip about using a woolly jumper for water retention. How brilliant is that? And they will eventually biodegrade. I will try and apply that myself. Now, every spring, I am amazed by the beauty and sheer weirdness of the imperial fritillaries. This is Fritillaria imperalis rubra maxima, and they are an absolute wonder and a joy in themselves. But then on top of that, they have this extraordinary relationship with blue tits, because blue tits pollinate them. The birds go in the flower looking for nectar and then move on and spread the pollen. And that is an amazing sight. I sit here for hours just waiting for the blue tits to come. And of course, every garden can provide wildlife magic. Whether it's birds and flowers, or it's frogs in a pond, or insects in long grass, it's all there if you just look and create the right environment for them to thrive. So this seems a really good time to rejoin Kate Bradbury in her garden in Brighton, which when she took it over was a pretty standard back garden, but very quickly she made it into a haven for wildlife.
When I first moved in, it was like a fairly standard back garden. There wasn't much going on, there wasn't much life. I made quite a dramatic decision to take out nearly all of the shrubs and trees that were growing here, and I replaced them with British natives. I also dug a pond, I made habitat piles. I've also got bee hotels and laid a wildflower meadow. The meadow has been the second most significant addition to my wildlife garden. The pond had made a huge difference just in terms of the amount of birds that came in. Hedgehogs were coming in and drinking from it. It's been a real centre of the garden, but the meadow as well. I've got things like oxeye daisy, I've got loads of different grasses, I've got buttercups. I think we should be more tolerant of plants that we traditionally regard as weeds. Even in a small garden, there's always a little tiny corner where you can grow a little patch of nettles or let dandelions flourish, because just having these small areas of weeds or wildflowers really benefits a whole host of species. A lot of people think that wildlife gardening is growing flowers for bees and butterflies and hoverflies and things, and that's a huge part of wildlife gardening. But it's only half of the story. It's all very well growing flowers for the adult butterflies, but if you don't provide leaves for the butterflies to lay eggs on, for their caterpillars, then you're missing a vital part of the food chain. Caterpillars are right at the bottom of the food chain, so not only are you providing habitats for the whole life cycle of the moths and butterflies to complete, you're also providing food for all the species that eat the caterpillars as well. So in a small wildlife garden, it's really important for plants to work really hard for wildlife. So this is a honeysuckle. It's the native honeysuckle, Lonicera periclymenum. It's a really great pollen and nectar plant for bees and other insects. And it's one of those plants as well that provides flowers for night-flying moths. Honeysuckles really like their roots growing in shade and the leaves growing in sun, so planting it on a north-facing wall where it can grow up into the sun is perfect. Because of climate change, bees in particular and some butterflies are coming out at different times of the year. So bumblebees might come out of hibernation as early as February, sometimes January in some years. And then you'll have other bees at the other end of the year that are still flying in November. So in my pollinator border, I grow things like crocus in spring, winter aconite. In summer, I grow lavender and catmint, and then sort of later into the summer, I grow Rudbeckia, Verbena bonariensis, and perennial wallflower as well, to take that season right up to the end of the year. So when growing plants for pollinators, it's really important to think about the shapes of the flowers, because different insects have different shaped mouth parts and visit different shaped flowers. So long-tongued bees will visit flowers with long tubes like honeysuckle and foxglove, and short-tongued bees will visit things like daisies and bowl-shaped blooms like cranesbills. So it's really important to grow the greatest variety of flower shapes as possible for the greatest variety of insects. As you can see, I've got salvias, which have got quite a little long tube. They're sort of lipped flowers. I've got poppies, which have got the really lovely bowl shape. We've got red campion in the foreground, white campion, and then catmint as well, which is really lovely lipped flowers. Lupins, when they flower, they've got quite interesting flower shapes, which long-tongued bees really benefit from as well. So I'm just going to plant 3 here and just have a really nice variety of flower shapes. So as well as planting things specifically for certain types of wildlife, it's also really important to tolerate the wildlife that comes in that you might not welcome that much. So here I've planted loads of flowering plants for bees, butterflies, hoverflies, moths, but also I've got loads of aphids coming in as well. And some gardeners might remove these aphids even with an organic spray. You know, you might take these aphids off and get rid of them, but I've just left them because house sparrows feed aphids to their babies, ladybirds lay eggs on aphid colonies, hoverflies lay eggs on aphid colonies, lacewings also eat them. And so just by leaving them, you've got a food chain in place, you've got a little ecosystem, and you're just providing a bit of extra food for all the other species in the garden. I've barely left the house since I made this garden. I never want to leave. It's my happy place. I love standing by the kitchen window and watching the sparrows coming in. And last week I had sparrows teaching their babies to have a bath, which was just so cute. It's just gorgeous. It's just the most wonderful thing. It makes me very, very happy indeed.
I think one of the unexpected benefits of the last year, and there haven't been many, has been that a lot of people have realised that quietly observing the natural world in their back garden is incredibly rewarding. It's not just about doing good for wildlife, it's the good that wildlife does for you. Now here in the orchard, we're in the process of making a wildflower meadow. And to that end, we've got lots of bulbs. The first daffodils are going over. There are more that will follow. We've got tulips almost opening. There are camasias, and then lots of annuals and perennials that we've sowed here, along with the yellow rattle, which stops the grass growing too strongly. But we do have a problem. And wildflower meadows are not that easy to make. You've got to garden them. You've got to nurture them. And at the moment, our biggest problem is one plant which on its own is fine, but en masse is a bit of a weed, and that is the common hogweed. It will grow to about 2-3 foot tall, lovely white umbellifer flowers, rather like cow parsley, which I adore. And you can tell the difference between cow parsley and hogweed. Hogweed has got rather a crude leaf, whereas the cow parsley is very filigree and fine. But the cow parsley doesn't spread as virulently, and the hogweed leaves will blanket out everything else. Now, giant hogweed is prescribed. It's enormous, it can grow to about 15 foot tall, and the combination of its sap and sunlight can cause really nasty burns, particularly if you've got tender skin. So if you've got that in your garden, you should inform the authorities and have it removed. The common hogweed can cause burns, much less likely to do so, but if you've got very tender skin, perhaps you should handle it with gloves. There are too many here to weed out individually, so what I'm going to do is deadhead it before it seeds, and that would be round about the end of May, beginning of June. But you don't need a wildflower meadow of any size to include umbellifers in your garden. These beds were cut out of the long grass only about 5 or 6 years ago. And we've been planting and building them up ever since. But the one thing that I haven't quite got right yet is linking them with the wildflower meadow. So my plan now is to plant umbellifers of various kinds that you can buy in garden centres and nurseries as plugs or young plants, so that there is a real link. And I've got a range of umbellifers to do that with. The first is cow parsley in a particular form. And this, which doesn't look much at the moment, is Anthriscus ravenswing. And it's cow parsley with purple foliage. And you can see I've actually got some already in the border. And then the flower stalk will rise up with the white, perhaps even slightly pinky flower. But I will add that to the border in there. And I'm going to plant some more carrots, because wild carrot, a Daucus, is really decorative. And if you left your carrots to go to seed, another biennial, so next spring, they would put up a flower stem with a white umbel. So I'm going to put that near the front. Now this is a perennial. It's a lovely umbellifer, which is also extremely accommodating. Any garden can grow this. It's called Solenum, and it will grow in almost any soil, take some sun and take some shade. So I'm going to pop that in there. And on top of that, I've got some Ami, and I sowed these in the autumn, the end of last September. This is Ami Majus. Now, don't try and sow Ami Majus now, it's too late. But the good news is that you can buy them as plants, and also Ami Visnaga you can sow now and it will flower in summer for weeks and weeks. Right, enough talk. Let's get on with some planting. And while I'm planting these, here are some jobs that you can do this weekend. Courgettes are the hardiest of the cucurbit family, and you can sow the seed for them now. Place 2 seeds on edge in a pot of peat-free compost. Cover them, water them, and keep them in a bright, warm place to germinate, and a south-facing windowsill will do the job fine. Now is the time to cut back penstemons, just as you start to see new growth emerging at the base of the plant. Now be brave, cut right back hard, removing all of last year's growth to let light and air into the new shoots. Annual climbers, such as Spanish flag or Corbea scandens that are grown from seed, will make a dramatic display in mid and late summer if sown now. Plant them into pots or plugs using a peat-free compost. Water them well and then put them somewhere warm to germinate and grow them on, ready to plant out after the last frost. This is an allium that I'm digging out of the Jewel Garden. Allium Purple Sensation, which is a beautiful plant. And when it's in flower, it's one of the best things in the garden. Originally, about, 25, 26 years ago, we planted 100 bulbs in here. And for the first few years, they were just a glory. We wished we had more, we wished it would spread. Well, be careful what you wish for, because it has spread with a vengeance. Anyway, I'm digging some up here because I have a cunning plan. Next week, I shall be planting a hedge. It's going to be evergreen, and this is a really good time of year to plant evergreen hedges. But before you plant any hedge at any time of year, it's really important to prepare the ground well, to get rid of any perennial weeds, because once you've planted the hedge, if the weeds are in amongst the roots of the hedge, you will never get rid of them. And I suggest doing this a week before you start to plant. And then if any weeds you've missed are there, they will come up and you can just give it another weed over before the planting begins. Well, it's just as well we've got to leave this for a week or so, because that's it for today. But join me here at Longmeadow next Friday for some hedge planting. Till then, bye-bye.